Welcome to the Diffuse Podcast with host Philip Grindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse, a global threat and intelligence consultancy that blends psychology and intelligence to mitigate threats and risks to prominent people and brands.
Welcome to the Diffuse Podcast, and delighted today to welcome back a good friend. I think James is possibly the second only person that we've invited back, which speaks volumes because we've been blessed with who we have. So those of you who don't know James Hamilton, his background is hugely impressive. And I know that many people listening to the podcast will probably know him and probably even been taught by him. He used to be a significant member at Gavin DeBecker out in the US, but James, you've gone your own way now. So tell us what you're doing now.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Good to be with you again, as always. I kind of went out and started this Hamilton Security Group, where I'm the founder and kind of main operator consultant, and really just targeting the executive protection private sector side. What programs kind of could be doing to make themselves better, how to train them. Really talking to CEOs about, do you need EP? What is it? What does it look like on the private side? What are some options for me? And I'm doing most of that, and then a little bit of personal security stuff through this something I call the safety seminar. It's about a 90-minute presentation to regular folks. Just, hey, how do I keep myself safe from violence? But yeah, enjoying it, and I'm grateful, and it's good to be with you again. Thank you.
So the attack on the New York CEO, your phone must have gone off the hook then, because even from sort of standards of violence and standards of attacks, that the reason that one got so much publicity, because that is still quite unusual, that type of attack.
It is. It is. It was shockingly, for you and I that kind of know that world, it wasn't very shocking because we kind of know what violence looks like. But for the people that haven't seen it, that's as raw as it gets. But I think, the belief that it wasn't a politician or a famous celebrity or, some rock star. It was just a guy that a lot of people never even heard of, but he's still, CEO of a major group. And it really was kind of a wake-up call. And, not only have I been getting a lot of phone calls, my peers, the organizations I represent from the EP side, that's all we've been talking about. And a lot of clients are calling, they're wanting to know, what do we do? And, like I kind of said to CNN, I think was, a lot of clients aren't calling because they've had a long sustained program and they're not nervous at all because they are prepared. It's the groups that don't have anything that are kind of freaking out right now. And then it's hard because, you can't just pick up the phone and call what bodyguards are us. There's just not a lot of people laying around looking for work, I don't think. And they're especially not going to be, great if you say, well, I only want it for the next 30 days, which is a lot of companies will do that. They'll say, well, just until it blows over. Well, a lot of people don't want to do that. I can't pull people off of a detail and give them to you for 30 days knowing they're going to get fired. Well, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. So, it's definitely a wake-up call.
And I know, we've talked through a previous podcast back in November 22. You and I have communicated over the last 2 or 3 years around various topics. And so you're right, this wasn't, the type of attack wasn't necessarily a surprise. You and I have talked about targeted attacks. Were you surprised that a CEO, an executive, was attacked quite so openly and without, sort of quite crudely in a way?
Yeah, I tell you, and I think the next part of that question would be, and that he was attacked because there was no security there. And I always tell people, that wasn't an executive protection problem because there was no executive protection in the environment. So it was really kind of just a personal attack type problem. The bigger question would be, well, why wasn't executive protection present? That's a really good question. And that's probably, a really good point. And private sector is far different than public sector, and private sector are paying the freight. And anytime they want, they can say, hey, I don't need you. It's what we call wave coverage. They can say, hey, stay wherever you are. I'm going to walk down the street, or I'm going to go into that restaurant, or I'm going to that bar, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's very difficult. And, for all those, Monday morning quarterbacks will say, oh, well, I would have stayed with him no matter what. Well, I don't think you've probably ever been in that position where the CEO of the company you're working for turns to you, if you're an FTE, not a vendor, because there's, different types. But if you're an FTE and that CEO turns to you and says, stay here, I'm not saying that's what happened here, but it does happen. It's very difficult for you to tell the CEO, no, I'm going with you, because they'll probably fire you.
Yeah.
So, to me, that wasn't an EP issue. It was definitely a good example of targeting and how targeting is done, how it's always, like we were saying earlier, assassination's always been about access. It always will be. And if you give people access, they're gonna try to take their shot, and that's what that kid did, no pun intended. But I hate that it happened, obviously. But for me, what I know is that CEOs that have trust and confidence in their detail usually don't waive coverage. But if you don't have trust and confidence in your team, you're more apt to waive coverage. You're more apt if you're not informed. They don't tell you, hey, this is the threat, this is a concern. You might say, I'm good. And I find that that's I see that a lot, actually. I hate to see it, but you got to tell him. You got to let him know so that he doesn't waive it.
So that kind of complacency that I'm not being threatened right now. There's no threat against me. I'm not getting horrible messages. No one's nasty to me. Even without that kind of direct evidence of a threat, in certain circumstances and perhaps in certain industries, you would still say, yeah, but there is a threat against you.
Yeah, and the way we look at it is through that lens of inappropriate pursuit. It's not the written threat or the spoken threat, as you know, that really gets us excited, because that's really not indicative of actual violence. Hunters and Howard's made that very clear to all of us. Hinckley didn't threaten Reagan, or Sirhan he didn't threaten Kennedy. Kremer didn't threaten Wallace. You can go down. Yigal Amir didn't threaten Rabin. But man, it's that coming, that focus. They just keep coming. The guy that shot Abe in Japan, he didn't threaten. He just kept coming. Built a gun. He planned. He was patient. Kept coming. Kept coming. That's what we're worried about. Is that behavior that's off, that's obsessive, that's inappropriate. That's what gets us very like, okay, we need to pay attention here. It's not the spoken threat. And so I think a lot of people in EP get that wrong. They'll say things like, well, that guy hasn't threatened us. Well, that's not indicative. It's the coming and showing up, especially known public appearances, especially known in advance. And this thing in New York was known. That's how he knew it. It was on the internet. Just like Hinckley read it in the paper. He read in the Washington Post that Reagan was at the Hilton. That's how it happens. They read about it and they go, I'm going to go do it, because now I know where he's going to be.
So how do we know who needs protection?
Oh, that's a great question. And there's so many variables to that, one could be that they're vain and they want it and they want to pay for it. Well, okay, then they're going to get it. But if you ask me who needs it, I would say anyone who's experiencing some type of inappropriate pursuit that can lead to violence, and they have the financial means to do it. That's usually that's kind of the big kicker, the financial means, because it's freaking expensive.
Yep.
Right. I deal with people all the time who are being stalked or threatened by a coworker. They can't afford an executive protection team, but I give them what I can. But they got to be their own bodyguard type of deal. But yeah, I think people, especially, if you're a CEO, major corporation, that definitely is something to consider. If your company's involved in something highly controversial, yes, if you are involved in things that public sentiment is not in your favor right now, you look at Musk, the threat profile on a Musk, today is far different than it was 10 years ago. Right. That thing has changed dramatically. And so, yeah, I think those are the types of people that definitely should be considered it. And it's not, it's not all the way. It's piecemeal. It's like residence only or office only or just transport or just public speeches. Very rarely do you find the clients like, yeah, I want it all, because it's expensive. It's the most expensive. And it's a super imposition into their life. Right. And I was telling a client yesterday, this is about, obviously keeping you safe, but also how much can you handle? How much of an imposition into your life can you really handle? Because, to do this right with full-time coverage, it is a tremendous imposition into your family. And a lot of people, I don't want to do that. Okay, well then let's help you with other things, but it's difficult. It's not easy. It's not like in the government when you tell, I'd have a government protectee and that poor guy, he had to take it. He had to take it all the imposition because it came with a job. It just doesn't work that way on the private side.
So So what's the basis? So a client comes to you and says, James, I'm concerned. I'm now just going to become the CEO of ABC Corporation, and there are people that don't like what we do. So what's your first step? How do you kind of assess the threat? How do you assess what's going on in this guy's life?
Yeah, make them less accessible to the public as I possibly can. So what's out there about them? What's available? I mean, residential targeting. It's surprising what you can find on a Google search. And then let's start to harden up those areas, the office, the home, the transport between the two. Let's make you less accessible to this pursuit. That's where I would start. And then let's see how this goes, right? And let's get a real, and here's a big one, threat assessment management. Everyone says they have that or someone's doing some type of threat assessment, but you need a real professionally trained threat assessment person assigned to that CEO and or the company, and they are taking in all that communication. Because then you start to peel that onion back. Hey, well, tell me about what's going on with you. Not just that you're the CEO and they don't like what you do, but have you received or has the company received inappropriate visits? And they'll say, oh yeah, we had this guy, he's shown up 15 times, but law enforcement thinks he's not a threat. Okay, boom, who's that guy? Like all of a sudden, now we got a guy immediately on the radar that, okay, we got to fill this gap. You got a real issue here. And then the people that are writing or emailing, who is monitoring that traffic, and then what are they telling us? Like, what's their assessment? That is a huge piece that I think is not as consistent as I'd like to see it. And then we start to put, a team together if they don't already have one and implement the protection around the known gaps or, where they are expected to be accessible. And then we, look at their schedule. Okay, what do you got on the horizon? And it's like, well, I got a speech to 5,000 people. Okay, well, I'm going to put some people on you. And I think, unfortunately, what happens, Phil, is that they'll say, okay, we're going to get a team together and put them on a CEO, and then they don't change the dynamic. And what I mean by that is public speech, 5,000 people. Okay, I'm going to have a significantly higher, footprint than if this person is going to play golf on Sunday and no one knows they're going to be there. Unfortunately, what happens is these details will just take the same package to golf on Sunday, and the protectee's like, well, what the hell? I don't need all these people here, man. And again, they haven't been able to stop when I say they, I mean the protectors. You got to say, wait a minute, who could access him here? Who would even know he's here? Because if the answer is no one, well, then give him a lot of space, man, because no one can know to set up on him. And I don't see that being kind of stressed as much as it should be.
So a kind of flexible program around
100%.
As the kind of threat changes, you have a flexible program because you're 100%. Knowing.
Yeah, you got to be able to ramp up and ramp down, but it's really hard to ramp up if you don't have any structure. And so that's what I help them do is develop structure. Get people in there, get them trained, get some policies together. Use effective protective strategies, and I explain what those are, and then we start to kind of implement, and let's see, and then we can always plus up, right? Like I can take one piece of executive protection, like, transport, secure transportation, and I can plus that thing up or bring that thing down based on what's going on. I can do it 5-6 different ways. And then it's really what can you handle? What can you all afford? All that matters. What's the threat? Is it nation state or is it some nut? Because if it's nation state, you're going to need an armored vehicle. You might need two. You might need to do a decoy. It's different. So it's not a fire and forget. Everyone gets, this standard thing. That's why I hate benchmarking. Can't stand it. It sounds interesting, but just because one CEO of a financial company has X, that doesn't mean that the guy I'm dealing with who's a CEO of a financial company deserves the same thing, because all threat and risk is nuanced.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing is if you ramp everything up all the time, then when actually there is a threat, you've got nowhere to go.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. And then the client's not going to tolerate it for 12 seconds. They're like, you all need to calm down. I don't need all this around me, for a cocktail party that, is at my house and no one even knew I was going to throw it, like they always say the same thing. They all say they want loose coverage. Why do they say that? Because they've had tight coverage forever, because the people don't know when to give space, right? I teach that. That's a critical piece of executive protection training. But when do you give space? Because they want it and we need to give it. Because if you can never give space and you're always 1.5 foot, offset government.gov model, that dude the CEO is going to say, look, I'm sick of this. You never give me any space. And unless you're dealing with somebody who's super notorious, a lot of these CEOs, you don't know who they are. Give them the space they want, because you can.
Yeah. It's claustrophobic, isn't it? When you've got
Oh,
all that all around you all the time, and it's not just you; it's your family, it's your kids, it's everything else that has to get wrapped up around that.
a
And
million percent.
it sounds very sexy, but actually, when you're living it, it's claustrophobic, it's
Oh,
intrusive, it's
yeah.
unpleasant.
That's why I use that word imposition, and that's what it is. It's, how much of that can you take? Because, wow, if you can take a lot, okay, great. I can put a whole program around you and you can afford it. Great. Awesome. That's the best way to do it. But man, it's a tremendous imposition into your life for sure. But I think that's the biggest hurdle with clients, is to get them to understand the lack of like seriousness of, my concern about a spoken threat versus inappropriate pursuit. That's the A. And then second is, making them, inaccessible when they want to be accessible, right? That's always the balance beam. We talk about, I have a teeter-totter slide I use in my training. But we don't want them to be accessible to the public, but they want to be accessible. So we got to find that balance, because that's, as we know from an assassination standpoint, that's what they need. They need access. So it's kind of we're always doing this.
So you shared a really good. I mean, I'm not with this me, but on LinkedIn you shared an article last week, which was primarily kind of driven by the execution in New York. And I found it really interesting, because you're talking about this concept of attack cycle. So can you just give us a bit of history about the attack cycle? What is it, and how did that develop?
Yeah, I learned about it about 20 years ago in the FBI, and then I think shortly thereafter, the Department of Homeland Security, Secret Service, they started using it, and it really just works through, how do criminals, terrorists, assassins, how do they target someone? Like, and they called it this thing called the attack cycle, and it usually starts out, first step is, general target list, and that could be, okay, healthcare CEO, and you can name 5 of them, right? And then they go out and they do some type of initial surveillance. And a lot of times that could just be keyboard warrior stuff, or they actually get off their ass. Can I say, I guess I
You
can
said
say
it.
that word.
That's fine.
Sorry. And they have to go out and actually do surveillance, right? And what are they looking for?
If someone gets upset by the word arse on our podcast, they're in the wrong podcast.
Yeah, I apologize. But they go out and they're, what they're looking for is this individual a hard or soft target? Is this individual someone I can get to, I can access, or do they have some type of real bumped out, visible protection that's like, man, I can't do it. I won't be successful, right? Because they want to be successful. Even crazy people, whatever you want to call these folks, they want to be successful. So then what happens is step 3 is they've done their work, they've done their surveillance, and by the way, that can be years. And then they come to or that can be days. I mean, it can happen that quick. And they say, okay, final target selection. It is going to be John Smith. And then okay, what is the intent? What do we want to do? Because now they've final target selection. Okay, it's John Smith. Now what is our goal? The organizational goal, individual goal. I want to kidnap, kill, embarrass, whatever, right? And by the way, kidnapping is a hell of a lot harder than killing, right? So then they'll find, okay, I'm going to kill him. Okay, then it is more surveillance to figure out where am I going to kill him, right? And as we know from the book, just 2 seconds, 64% attacks in and around the vehicle, 77% are fatal. So what that tells us is, though they do have attacks at a residence, like the Pennsylvania governor mansion, that's a whole thing. But usually it happens in transit, because they see the bumped out security, or what happens with that, Phil, is they see the home and there's some unknowns. They can see the cameras. They might be able to see, alarm signs or dog signs or dogs, but there's an unknown factor with a home. And I'm not sure if you're there. I'm not sure where you sleep. I'm not sure if you have a safe room. I'm not sure you have a bodyguard in your bedroom or a dog that's going to eat my face off. So they a lot of times pick the car when you leave. Why? Well, because I can see all your security. I can see all you got, right? And then I can figure out how I want to do it. If you're not in armor, it's a lot easier. And then I'm going to, figure out a place where I want to do it. And that's a real thing. And then they launch, right? So then the attack cycle is, okay, then they deploy, right? Then target arrives, and then action. And so what we always tell the quote unquote good guys, and this, if you're using the attack cycle, good guys, bad guys are using it. Good guys, you have some opportunities. And the good guys' opportunity is definitely step 2, initial surveillance. As a professional protection person, I want to create an environment, a protective strategy where they see, oh shit, they got it all, right? We're doing decoy runs with the motorcade. We have visible security. We're doing roving patrols. We're making it very difficult for you to do physical surveillance in and around our place, right? I don't want you to put my guy's name at step 3. I want you to see all my stuff and go, nope, I'm going to go down the road to this corporate security or this other CEO who's got nothing, right? That's my goal. And then so after step 3, final target selection, you can still see the planning. If you're paying attention, you can still see the surveillance. You can still see maybe staging. You might see that. And then lastly is action. You might have seconds. You're driving the limo, car throws a block, guy gets out with a gun. Okay, you do have something. You can run him over. You can make a decision. It's seconds now, split seconds, but you still have an ability to affect the outcome here. But that's what the adversary uses. That's what Bremer used. That's what this kid in New York used. I can go down a line of assassins. Yeah, it's really good. I've used it for years. I think it's super important. And I think a lot of times what folks do, and I've seen this, is when they see step 2. So when I mean when good guys at an estate see step 2, physical surveillance, they'll say that's nothing. They'll see it. They'll see the guy in the car and they'll go, oh, it's nothing. It's just a dude. Make a story. Oh, it's just a guy waiting on his girlfriend. Well, why would it be a guy waiting on his girlfriend? Why couldn't it just be a guy outside a protected estate where a notorious celebrity or CEO is living and he's sitting in his car taking notes? That looks like surveillance to me. Why not start there? Because it's hard. That's the answer.
I think what's really important here also for the purpose of the podcast is to, some people might say, okay, this is all very American. Let me just remind people of how Jo Cox, the MP, was killed. Because she was killed as she got out of her vehicle and as she began walking towards where she was about to meet her members. And the guy that killed her was no criminal mastermind or, a trained assassin or anything else. So this isn't about somebody who is a highly trained former, special forces, whatever. This guy was a loner who'd had no history of doing this sort of stuff, but he followed exactly the same protocol that you're talking about in a tiny little village in the north of England, and attacked her, killed her, and just kind of wandered off down the road. So for those people who are listening and thinking, yeah, but we don't get this in the UK. Yes, you do. Yes, we do. Oh, yeah. And if we and we talked about this earlier, so we'll touch on it. If we look at how British politicians are attacked, every single one of them has been attacked at or near their office because access and predictability.
Yep.
They're not going to hang around their house because they're going to get pinged and they don't know whether they're there. So everything you've just been articulating is exactly what we see here. So the challenge, I guess, is if you are going to you're taking your client to a venue where they're going to be, where it's predicted, everyone knows they're coming, lots of advertising, all that sort of stuff. He's a kind of, some CEOs are almost celebrities in their own right because of who they are. How then do you manage that in terms of the surveillance and identifying that when there's, crowded places, and what are you looking for then?
Well, the best thing for me then is how do we set the environment? Because you're way past the surveillance point of that. We're going in, they're probably already set up. Now it's all about creating an environment that puts all basically a lot of the the advantages on our side, and one of that would be access control. Okay, who's coming in here, and are we searching them? And if they're like, no, you're not searching, okay, then I'll tell the boss we're going to be closer. Because the more we can search and the more we can check out who these folks are, seat them in a place we want, keep them back. That 25 feet is the good rule we get out of just 2 seconds. Keep someone back 25 feet gives us time. The more that I can do of that, the less close I need to be to the protectee. And what I tell them is, look, if I can do all these other security things, check for weapons, all that, keep them back, create a barrier, then I don't need to be as close to you. But if you don't let me do access control, you don't let me search for weapons, you don't let me create setback, I got to get right up on your belt buckle, right? And then oh, okay. But that's how you do it. You create a safe environment where you're always thinking, how do I cover an evac? How do I cover an evac? Am I close enough to grab him and move him to a safe room? Am I close enough to grab him and move him back to the car? If you're just like I see all the time, protector at the back of the room watching, well, you're going to be too late.
Yep.
You're going to watch it happen and you're going to watch the attack. And that is not what you're being paid to do. So that's how we do it. That's how I do it. But again, it's a balancing act between, how much do they want, an MP is difficult because they want to be accessible to the people. But you got to create barriers. If you can't search the people, then I got to be in the room. And let's put a table between you and the member from, the public. It's all those little protective strategies that you have to deploy to increase your odds of safety.
So what I want to do is in our next episode, we're going to kind of really dig into this attack cycle in kind of a little bit more detail through the stages. But one thing that struck me was, how does that differ, or how does it fit together with the pathway to violence?
Okay. Yeah. Happy to do it.
So let's talk about that then, because before we end this session, because they're two different models.
Yep.
But it seems to me that there is some crossovers, and some of perhaps the attack planning sits into various stages of the pathway to violence. Would that be right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of times, like you look at pathway to violence, there's a grievance.
Yep.
It usually starts with some type of grievance. I don't know necessarily on for the attack cycle, because the attack cycle is really it's assassin, it's, criminal groups, terrorist groups. They may not have a grievance. They just may not like you, or just, hey, I want to hurt somebody. And so I don't need a grievance, right? I'm going after it. No, there are parts of the pathway, planning, research, weapons, getting a weapon, that's all exploitation. They're kind of very similar. But to me, the biggest difference would be there's not a lot of surveillance talk on the pathway.
Yep.
If you read about the pathway of violence, they don't talk a lot. They may say research, but the attack cycle is a lot of surveillance, right? It's the initial, who are we going to do? Then it's okay, we've chosen you, we're going to do more, because we've got to figure out where we want to do it. To me, there's more opportunities. Well, I wouldn't say more opportunities. There's opportunities on both to see it, to spot it, and stop it. I think that's true. And I think good threat assessment can do that with pathway to violence, workplace violence type situation. But yeah, I think that's the biggest factor to me. And if you look at the pathway, it never gives any type of credibility to the person being targeted. It doesn't say the person being targeted has any chance. It's just like, well, this guy's on a pathway to violence, he's going to do it, and you have no choice. Well, the attack cycle doesn't say that. It lets the good guys know, okay, you have opportunities. And so I kind of like that part of it, because I think that's true. And I think it's also true on, the workplace side. But yeah, those are the big differences, I think.
Okay, brilliant. So what we're going to do is, this has been a really, as I knew it would be, a really interesting discussion. In the next episode, we're going to dig deep into this model, the attack cycle, and we're going to pick out all the various phases of it and go into a bit more detail around what they are and how do we mitigate against them. And we're going to do that in the second bit. So before we end this podcast, let's remember, everyone, to sign up to the Diffuse News, our newsletter that comes out every Monday morning. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss any episodes that come down. And of course, don't forget to buy my new book, Personal Threat Management, which James very kindly wrote in as well, and available on Amazon. And I think you'll find it's a good read and fits into this subject nicely. But for now, we'll close off. Thank you, James, and see you in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Diffuse Podcast with host Philip Grindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse. Please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platforms.